Hey guys, tonight we're stepping onto one of the dustiest, most delicious highways in human history, the Silk Road. Not the online kind that got raided, but the real one, the slow, sun-baked artery that once stitched together empires with camel hooves, gossip, and the irresistible scent of roasted nuts. You can almost feel the grit under your sandals, the dry wind in your teeth. You might think you'd survive this, just a few thousand miles of scenic deserts, but the truth is, you probably won't make it past the first sandstorm without a snack. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're listening from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The road begins before dawn, and so do you. The horizon is a line of gold dust. Camels grunt, bells jingle softly, and somewhere in the crowd, a merchant is already arguing about raisins. You're not following silk tonight, you're following crumbs. The kind that cling to fingers sticky with honey. The kind that tell stories longer than any scroll. You pass traders from Sogdia, Persia, India, and China, each carrying a bit of home in their packs. Dried apricots from Samarkand, pistachios from Bactria, melon seeds toasted in Gansu smoke. They call them travel snacks, but in truth, they're survival food. Compact, portable, and miraculously edible after a week in a sandstorm. The silk routes weren't just about luxury, they were about endurance. Historians still argue whether the earliest Silk Road caravans were really trading silk at all, or if they were mostly moving food, barley cakes, fermented mare's milk, pickled vegetables, along these endless tracks. What's certain is that even the poshest envoy couldn't resist the humbler trade, something sweet to chew while pretending to negotiate peace. Picture a caravan stop at dusk. The camels kneel, ropes creak, and fires flicker alive across the dunes. Someone unwraps a cloth bundle, revealing what looks like crumbling gold. Sesame honey bars, hardened by time and heat. They snap with a crunch that could wake a mummy. You taste one? It's smoky, nutty, absurdly sweet. Maybe too sweet, but when you've been breathing sand all day, sugar feels like mercy. It's funny to think the same basic snack might appear 3,000 miles away in China, shaped into bite-sized huasheng tang or peanut brittle. The difference? The honey becomes malt syrup. The sesame shifts to peanuts or rice puffs, but the purpose stays the same. Energy for the road, comfort for the traveler. One mainstream fact historians actually agree on: by 100 BCE, the Han Dynasty had formalized trade routes that stretched as far as Persia. Alongside silk bolts and jade carvings came sacks of dried fruit, especially figs and dates, sticky calorie bombs that didn't spoil easily. Soldiers guarding frontier outposts chewed on them between battles, which might be the ancient equivalent of eating trail mix in a cubicle. But here's a quirky tidbit that rarely makes it into textbooks. Chinese sources mention camel cakes. Not made of camels, thankfully, but baked for them. Ground barley mixed with dates and fat, pressed into dense bricks. Some travelers probably ate them too, out of desperation or curiosity. You can imagine the taste. Half granola bar, half regret. You walk a little farther along the dusty trail, your breath sinks with the camels. The sky turns the color of faded parchment, and you start to notice that everyone's hands are busy. Traders, soldiers, monks, all reaching into pouches for little bites. The Silk Road wasn't just commerce, it was constant chewing. Eating was communication, a way to fill silence between languages. A Persian merchant might offer a dried apricot to a Chinese guard, who replies with a candied ginger cube. Deals began with snacks long before they were sealed with signatures. Historians still argue whether that ritual sharing of food was instinctive diplomacy or just hungry boredom. Either way, every exchange left behind invisible threads of taste that tied cultures together. At a small caravanserai, you settle beside a woman from Khotan roasting almonds on a flat pan. The scent hits like nostalgia for something you've never lived. She sprinkles salts harvested from a nearby oasis, grains the size of pearls, and explains in broken Greek that travelers love the crack-crack sound more than the flavor. You believe her. The rhythm of the crunch, like footsteps on gravel, might be the only music people heard for days. The funny thing about slow trade is that it leaves time for flavors to mutate. An almond roasted here becomes a candied nut there. A fig stuffed with walnut in Persia morphs into a steamed bun with red bean in China. Over centuries, recipes crawl like lizards, changing scales as they cross climates. And yet, some snacks remain almost eternal. Archaeologists once found 1,300-year-old fried dough twists in a Tang Dynasty tomb, essentially ancient churros. They were so perfectly preserved, you could still see the spiral ridges. No one's brave enough to taste them, but you suspect they'd still crunch. Night deepens. A musician somewhere plucks a string instrument that sounds suspiciously like a cat complaining. You lean back against a sack of silk and realize something profound and slightly ridiculous. The Silk Road might have been history's first global picnic. Every culture brought a dish, and none of them went home empty-handed. As stars scatter above the desert, a bowl of dried mulberries passes from hand to hand. Someone laughs about how slow the caravan moves, how even the dates seem to age between oases. And maybe that's the charm. The snacks last because the journey doesn't rush. The Silk Route's trade was measured not in speed, but in how well your provisions held up. A final thought drifts across your drowsy mind as the fire pops and the scent of honey mingles with camel sweat. Every empire thought it could own the Silk Road, but really, it was ruled by the ones who packed the best lunch. You close your eyes to the crunch of roasted nuts, and the caravan lulls you toward dreams. Tomorrow, you'll walk farther, taste stranger things, and learn why history itself moves at the pace of a melting candy. You wake to the soft grunt of a camel and the metallic jingle of brass bells. Morning on the Silk Road smells like dust, smoke, and something faintly nutty. Somebody's already roasting breakfast. You stretch your arms, bones creaking like ancient wood, and wander toward the fire where a trader stirs a shallow pan filled with almonds. They're glistening with a thin coat of sugar, which, when it cools, will turn into a glassy shell of sweetness. You reach for one, burn your fingers, and grin through the sting. It's worth it. The first bite crunches loud in the silence. Sweet, earthy, and smoky. It's the taste of 1,000 miles ahead. The silk routes weren't all grand caravans and exotic luxuries. Much of it looked like this. Breakfasts made of nuts and seeds, merchants with sticky hands, and horses glaring as if offended by the smell of sugar. You travel with a mixed crowd. Persian traders hauling saffron, Turkic herders selling milk, and one slightly suspicious monk with a pack that jingles suspiciously like stolen coins. Every few hours, someone opens a cloth pouch and offers something edible, and that's how you learn about the real network that bound Asia together, the snack exchange. Historians still argue whether street food began in cities or along these dusty roadside stops. What's certain is that portable bites, nuts, dried fruit, candied seeds made travel possible. You can't boil rice in a sandstorm, but you can always chew almonds. At the next oasis, the road turns lively. You follow a line of smoke to a small market half buried in dunes. Lanterns sway, vendors shout, and from every tent comes a smell. Sweet, spicy, or suspiciously oily. This is what some later poets called the night bazaar, where traders turned their layovers into parties. You drift between stalls like a moth drawn to honey. A woman in indigo robes waves you over. Her hands are fast and sure as she rolls sesame seeds into syrup, pressing them into small discs that harden in seconds. For travel, she says, handing you one. It's still warm, pliant, fragrant with crushed rose petals. You take a bite, and the world slows down to chewable time. The same basic recipe appears everywhere you go: China, Persia, India, the Levant, always with local twists. Some add pistachio, some cardamom, others a risky splash of fermented honey wine. In a way, these nut sweets were edible passports, proving that you'd passed through worlds and survived. A mainstream historical fact here: almonds and pistachios were among the first luxury snacks traded along the Silk Road. Archaeobotanists, the unsung heroes who dig up ancient lunchboxes, have found nutshells packed inside the cargo remnants of silk route stops as far west as Palmyra and as far east as the Hexi Corridor. It turns out these weren't just treats, they were part of diplomacy. Almonds and raisins traveled as gifts between envoys alongside silks and horses. But here's your quirky tidbit of the hour. Some nomadic tribes roasted chickpeas with sand instead of oil. They'd heat fine desert sand in a metal pan until it shimmered, then pour in the beans, stirring furiously until the skins crisped and popped. When they cooled, they'd sift out the sand and store the crunchy chickpeas for weeks. You can imagine the first person who tried that, probably out of desperation, and discovered something halfway between a snack and a survival hack. You sit beside a group of travelers from Transoxiana. Their dialect is a blend of 10 languages and laughter. One passes you a small bundle of dried cheese curds, hard as stones, but salty and satisfying. Another offers figs stuffed with almonds. The monk with the suspicious jingling pouch turns out to be carrying candied ginger and insists it prevents travel fatigue. You believe him until he winks and admits he just likes sugar. The night market hums with low conversation, the kind that wraps around you like warmth. Candles flicker in colored glass jars, and someone's frying dough in oil. The smell is enough to hypnotize a small army. You drift closer and see the dough twisted into braids, sizzling golden, then drizzled with honey and sesame. You ask the cook what it's called, and he shrugs. Sweet rope. Keeps teeth busy. Historians still argue whether fried sweets traveled east or west first, whether China's youtiao inspired Persian zulbia, or vice versa. The truth, like the dough, is stretchy. Recipes changed shape wherever they landed, absorbing whatever spice or oil the region had on hand. You wander through the bazaar, sugar-coating your fingers, and realize how snacks mirrored trade itself. Endlessly borrowed, lightly modified, and cheerfully plagiarized. A nut becomes a symbol of hospitality, a sweet becomes a memory of home, and together they keep empires moving. Somewhere near the edge of the market, you find a small crowd around a storyteller. His hands move as fast as his tongue, and between sentences, he pops roasted lentils into his mouth. The story is about a man who crossed the Taklamakan Desert with only one bag of sesame sweets, survived 40 days, and came back with enough energy to open a bakery. The audience laughs. Someone shouts that he probably just ate the camel. It's strange comfort, this humor born of hunger. You realize the Silk Road wasn't only about movement. It was about waiting. For caravans, for storms to pass, for traders to agree on a price. Snacks filled that space, both literally and emotionally. As the night deepens, the stars prick through the sky like pinholes in silk. You lie back near the fire, chewing a final almond, and listen to the soft murmur of the market winding down. Somewhere, someone is still selling dried apricots under the faint hum of wind. The journey ahead will be long and dusty, but your pack now smells like roasted nuts and candied sesame, a promise of comfort bite by bite. The next leg will take you deeper into sugar's domain, where sugar turns political and entire empires start guarding recipes like treasure. For now, though, you just enjoy the crunch. The night market fades to a low murmur, and sleep steals over you like honey poured slow. You wake before sunrise again, though this time you're sticky. There's sugar on your sleeve, syrup in your hair, and a few suspicious ants making early morning pilgrimages up your arm. It's a hazard of the job. The air tastes faintly sweet, proof that somewhere nearby, someone's already melting sugar. The Silk Road's great paradox begins to unfold here. For centuries, people crossed deserts and mountains to chase a substance that melts in rain and burns in sunlight. You walk past rows of traders packing glassy sugar cones into straw baskets, careful not to crack the brittle treasures. This isn't just food, it's alchemy. Historians still argue whether sugar first reached Central Asia from India or Persia. Both claim the honor, of course. The Indians had been boiling sugarcane juice into solid crystal since before 500 BCE, calling it sharkara, from which we get sugar. The Persians refined it into glittering white sand they dubbed candy, from khand. The Chinese, ever the pragmatists, wrote about this exotic honey without bees that came through the western gates of their empire. Wherever it started, once it arrived, everyone got hooked. You pass a Persian merchant lecturing a Chinese envoy on the proper way to eat candied fruit. One piece at a time, slowly. Otherwise, your teeth revolt. The envoy nods politely, but you can tell he's already pocketing 3. It's easy to forget that sugar was once medicine. Apothecaries in Baghdad prescribed it for sore throats and bad moods. Ancient Chinese doctors recommended crystallized honey water to balance heat in the body. Somewhere along the way, the medicine became the addiction. You stop at a way station where cooks are boiling syrup in iron pots, stirring with wooden paddles thicker than your arm. The air smells of caramel and smoke, the kind that clings to your clothes for days. A man explains that this batch will travel west to Samarkand, where it will be mixed with almonds, rosewater, and a pinch of saffron to make a confection fit for a caliph. He scoops a spoonful, blows on it, and offers it to you. It's scalding, ridiculously sweet, and, against all logic, worth the burned tongue. A mainstream historical fact worth noting, by the 8th century, sugar production had become a full-blown industry across Persia and the Islamic world. Entire plantations of sugarcane lined the Euphrates and Indus rivers. Refineries appeared near Baghdad, Damascus, and Nishapur. For centuries, sugar was as strategic as gold, controlled by whoever held the mills and the trade routes. But here's your quirky tidbit. One 10th century traveler wrote about snow sugar, a luxury sweet cooled in mountain caves during summer. Servants would carry blocks of ice down from high peaks, pack them in straw, and chill sugar syrup until it hardened into delicate flakes. Historians still argue whether this was the ancestor of sherbet or just the world's most overcomplicated snack. Either way, you'd have to admire the commitment. You walk along a caravan moving westward, each donkey loaded with cones of sugar wrapped in reed mats. The cones look like small missiles of sweetness stacked carefully to prevent cracks. The merchants treat them like gold. If one breaks, the shards are sold at discount markets to commoners because even broken sugar was too precious to waste. And yet, for all the sweetness, there's a bitter edge to the trade. Workers in the field slash cane from dawn to dusk, sweating under the same sun that melts their product. You pass a group of them resting under a fig tree, chewing on raw stalks for a hit of energy. Their laughter sounds light, but their eyes tell you sugar costs more than money. By dusk, you reach another market, this one larger, noisier, more chaotic. Banners flap overhead, someone shouting about the new miracle of candied almonds. Another advertises honey from the tears of angels, which you suspect just means overpriced syrup. The crowd is thick with diplomats, priests, and soldiers, all pretending not to be here for dessert. Historians still argue whether this was the moment sweetness became political. The Abbasid Caliphate, the Tang court, and the Gupta kings all hoarded sugar recipes the way modern nations hoard nuclear codes. A rumor spreads that Chinese officials tried to grow cane near Guangzhou using smuggled seeds from India, only to fail because they didn't understand irrigation. Another tale says a Persian envoy bribed an Indian farmer with silk to learn the boiling technique. No one can prove either story, but you can practically smell the espionage in the air, sticky and caramelized. You stop at a stall selling something that looks suspiciously modern, thin sheets of sugar pulled into ribbons, twisted into flowers. The vendor calls it dragon's beard candy. He pulls a lump of syrup again and again until it turns pale and silky, wrapping crushed peanuts inside. You take a bite. It dissolves instantly, leaving only sweetness and the faint crunch of nuts. You can't help laughing. It's candy floss without the stick, spun by hand centuries before electricity. A poet nearby recites verses about the tragedy of eating too fast. Sugar, he says dramatically, is patience made visible. You nod as if you understand, though you're mostly thinking about seconds. As night falls, you find yourself sitting with a group of traders from Damascus and Kashgar. They're passing around bowls of candied orange peel, arguing about whether sweetness dulls the senses or sharpens them. One man insists that sugar makes his dreams vivid, another swears it ruins his memory. They all keep eating. You listen to their chatter fade into the desert wind. Somewhere in the distance, a donkey sneezes, a reminder that not everything romantic about history survives close inspection. The stars are sharp tonight, like grains of salt scattered across a black tablecloth. You lean back, sticky hands tucked behind your head, and realize that what you're witnessing is bigger than trade. You're seeing how the human craving for comfort shapes empires. Every caravan carries the same contradiction. People walking into hardship carrying sweetness on their backs. Maybe that's the secret logic of the Silk Road. Every hardship justified by a bite of something soft, sweet, and fleeting. As your eyes grow heavy, you imagine a slow-motion river of sugar flowing across centuries, melting, reforming, and reappearing as everything from Persian nougat to Chinese rice candy to medieval marzipan. The recipes will travel faster than the caravans ever could. You drift towards sleep to the faint crunch of sugar cooling in the night air. Somewhere, someone is still stirring syrup, chasing that perfect shade between golden and burnt. Tomorrow, your path will twist again, towards spice and pastry, where sweet meets heat and the Silk Road starts to taste like home.
You wake up to a smell that makes your stomach growl before your eyes even open. Warm bread, charred at the edges, dusted with something sharp and aromatic. Somewhere close, someone's baking. The air itself tastes like spice. You sit up, brush sand from your clothes, and see the source. A small clay tandoor dug into the ground, flames licking the rim, and flat rounds of dough slapped to the inner wall. The baker lifts one with a metal hook, sprinkles black seeds across the surface, and tears it in half to share. The first bite crunches, then softens into smoky chewiness. There's pepper, a whisper of coriander, and maybe cinnamon? That can't be right, but it is. You've just stumbled into one of the Silk Road's greatest collisions when the spice routes met the snack trade and everything changed flavor. The baker grins when he sees your confusion. "Cinnamon from the south," he says proudly, tapping a small jar of reddish dust. "Worth more than a good camel," he laughs, but he's not exaggerating. Historians still argue whether cinnamon reached Central Asia through Indian merchants or Arabian seafarers. Either way, by the time it got here, it was precious enough to weigh against silver. Traders mixed it into breads, sweets, even wine, not because it made sense, but because they could. Eating cinnamon became a statement. I can afford my bread to smell like legend. You wander through the settlement. The market is alive with clatter and spice smoke. You can taste nutmeg just by breathing. Feel black pepper tingle at the back of your throat. A man waves you over with a plate of fried pastries, thin triangles filled with spiced lentils and sesame oil. You bite in, crisp shell, soft interior, just enough chili to make you sneeze yourself awake. He calls them sambusa. They'll one day become samosas, sambushek, and 100 other forms. But right now, they're just road food. Cheap, filling, and portable. A mainstream historical fact to ground you. By the 9th century, the silk and spice routes had merged in multiple hubs, especially around Samarkand, Bukhara, and Kashgar, creating global markets that sold both fabric and flavor. Those cities became melting pots, not only of language and religion, but of taste. Archaeologists have even found peppercorns sealed in Chinese tombs from this period, proof that the world's first fusion cuisine was already in full swing. And here's your quirky tidbit. A few medieval sources mentioned a peculiar camel curry served at roadside inns. The cooks supposedly flavored it with cinnamon, salt, and something translated as sun pepper. Scholars aren't sure if that was saffron, chili, which hadn't reached Asia yet, or a now extinct herb. Historians still argue whether the description was exaggerated or a sign that ancient cooks were experimenting long before Instagram made it cool. You stop to rest beside a caravan leader who's spooning spiced lentil stew onto rounds of bread. He tears pieces with his hands, using the bread as both plate and utensil. "Good food travels fast," he says, handing you some. You think about that. In truth, it doesn't. The Silk Road's food travels glacially, carried in saddlebags, reinvented every few hundred miles. But somehow, the recipes endure. A group of traders from the Levant argue nearby over the best way to flavor flatbread. One swears by sesame and thyme, another by pepper and vinegar. They settle the debate in the traditional way. Both eat until they can't speak. The spice trade adds new rhythm to the journey. Instead of long stretches of silence and sand, the air now buzzes with negotiation. At one stall, you watch a spice dealer weighing cinnamon bark on tiny brass scales, muttering that thieves keep shaving it to fake the weight. Next to him, a woman sells honey cakes laced with cardamom. You bite one and nearly cry. It's soft, floral, and faintly smoky from the firewood. "Old recipe," she says proudly. "Persia learned it from India. India learned it from the stars." You don't know if that's poetry or marketing, but either way, you buy another. Later, you find yourself in a tea tent. Yes, tea. The Chinese brought that too, though here it's brewed black and bitter, spiked with salt and yak butter. A Persian trader adds crushed cloves and insists it's the cure for everything, including heartbreak. You sip. It's thick, savory, confusing, and somehow perfect for this place where nothing belongs wholly to one culture. Historians still argue whether these spice teas inspired later Indian masala blends or Tibetan butter tea. But one thing's clear. The Silk Routes didn't just trade goods, they traded habits. A man from Samarkand sipping butter tea was as revolutionary as a Chinese monk eating a pepper pastry. Night falls again, and the campfires burn in a ring of orange light across the plain. The air hums with laughter, the clink of metal cups, and the sound of dough being slapped flat for the next day's journey. You share bread with a group of travelers from Anatolia. They're experimenting with a new filling, minced nam, herbs, and just enough dried fruit to make the flavor swing between sweet and salty. They joke that it's portable dinner for impatient people. You joke back that it's history's first empanada prototype. A mainstream fact worth chewing on. Those filled pastries eventually evolved into foods across continents. Samosas in South Asia, manto dumplings in China, pastilla in North Africa, empanadas in Spain, all descendants of some Silk Road cook too tired to separate sweet from salty. You take another bite, realize it's dangerously addictive, and that the pastry doesn't care which empire you're in. Food like this ignores borders long before maps do. Somewhere nearby, a musician plays a reed flute. The notes twist and scatter like smoke. You lie back, belly full, and think about how much of history has been written in spices, how cinnamon and pepper built fortunes, toppled kings, and flavored simple bread for travelers like you. Your eyelids grow heavy, but your mind drifts through the smells around you. Cinnamon, cumin, charred dough, and the faint sweetness of honey cooling in a pot. These are the perfumes of motion, the aromas that connected oceans to deserts. The fire pops, someone laughs about a missing bag of pepper that probably rolled downhill, and another jokes that if you follow the smell, you'll find it in a king's kitchen 3 months from now. You smile in the dark. The Silk Road snack trade may be slow, but it's unstoppable, each bite carrying stories across centuries. Tomorrow, those stories will change shape again, becoming pastries, pies, and eventually the vending machine snacks that survive long after the empires crumble. For now, you rest among strangers who smell of spice and smoke, lulled by the quiet confidence that history, like dough, always rises again.
By the time you reach the coast, the air tastes different. Humid, salty, and heavy with the promise of something fried. You've walked thousands of miles from the deserts of Central Asia, following the trail of crumbs, nuts, and sugar crystals that mapped the slow heartbeat of human appetite. Now, seagulls replace camels, ships replace caravans, and still, everywhere you go, people are eating. You arrive at a bustling port, maybe Alexandria, maybe Guangzhou, maybe Venice. It's hard to tell anymore. The accents blur, the smells merge, and the same familiar hand gestures of trade, fingers measuring salt, palms rubbing together over price, translate universally. Somewhere between the barrels of spices and the crates of silk sits a humble stall with a sizzling pan. The cook is tossing small pockets of dough in oil, sprinkling them with salt and crushed coriander. They look like miniature golden moons. You reach for one, bite through crisp crust into a filling of minced meat and dried fruit. Sweet, salty, perfect. Empanada, he calls it, or maybe sambusak, or pirashki. The names twist like languages, but the idea never changes. Food that travels well, tastes better, and tells a story at every stop. Historians still argue whether filled pastries were invented in Central Asia, the Middle East, or the Mediterranean. The safe answer, like most Silk Route debates, is yes, all of them. Recipes moved like gossip, impossible to trace to one source. You watch sailors load barrels of pepper and saffron onto ships bound for Europe. The deckhands chew dried figs between ropes and curses, just as caravan guards once did under desert moons. Some things never change. Trade moves slow, but hunger never waits. A mainstream historical fact anchors the scene. By the 14th century, ports like Venice, Aden, and Calicut were bursting with goods once reserved for emperors. Sugar had gone from medicine to candy, pepper was sprinkled on everything from fish to fruit, and portable pastries had become the traveler's universal comfort. Even the crusaders, who marched for faith, marched better when fed on dried fruit and sesame cakes. And here's your quirky tidbit. Venetian records describe sailors carrying preserved melon, essentially early fruit leather made from boiled pulp and honey. It was chewy, tangy, and lasted months at sea, proof that the first fruit roll-up predates the printing press. You stroll along the docks, listening to the slap of ropes, the bark of traders, the creak of ships shifting on the tide. The world has grown smaller, but its appetite has only expanded. You taste roasted chestnuts from Anatolia, candied orange peel from Damascus, sesame halwa from Persia, and flaky pastry stuffed with almond paste from Cairo. Each one tastes faintly familiar, like a cousin of something you've already eaten 2,000 miles ago. Food historians sometimes call this the echo effect, the way recipes bounce through cultures until no one remembers who started them. The Silk Routes didn't just carry ingredients, they carried ideas of flavor, sweet plus salty, crunch plus chew. Every roadside snack became a global whisper that said, "Try this, it's good." You sit at a low table near the water, watching the sunset paint the sails gold. A young cook beside you crushes spices in a mortar, pepper, cinnamon, cloves, sugar, and mixes them into dough. "New thing," he says proudly, "spice cake, keeps long." You smile, not telling him that in a few hundred years, someone in Europe will call it gingerbread and claim it as their own. Historians still argue whether medieval European sweets were inspired directly from Eastern recipes or merely by the trade goods themselves, but the evidence is in the crumbs. Almonds, honey, sugar, and cinnamon. 4 ingredients that walked the Silk Road hand in hand. You chew another pastry, flakier than before, and realize how far snacks have evolved. They've gone from survival food to social symbol. On one end of the Silk Routes, a laborer still chews dried chickpeas for strength. On the other, a Venetian noble nibbles marzipan roses sculpted into crowns. It's the same sugar, different story. A group of sailors nearby argue over a crate of raisins. One insists they're from Persia, another swears they taste Egyptian. You imagine how many centuries those grapes have been traveling under different names. Kishmish, Staphyles, Sultana. Every region renames them, but the sweetness stays loyal to no one. The night thickens with smoke and laughter. The port smells like cinnamon, tar, and fried dough. Musicians play something halfway between a Persian melody and a Greek drinking song. You find yourself humming along, thinking of the roads behind you. The almonds and sesame, the honey and sugar, the cinnamon and pepper. Every bite has been a breadcrumb leading here to this noisy, beautiful intersection where history eats with its hands. You notice a child selling small paper packets of roasted chickpeas, the same sand-roasted kind you first tasted in the desert. You buy one, more for nostalgia than hunger. The crunch takes you back across every mile you've walked. The sound is the same, only the language around it has changed. A merchant next to you unwraps something new, a bar of compressed nuts, honey, and puffed grain. Keeps you awake, he says proudly. You can't help but laugh. It's an ancient energy bar. The Silk Route's snack trade never really ended. It just evolved into the convenience aisle. And somewhere, deep inside, that realization feels comforting. Humanity has always found a way to make endurance taste like pleasure. As the night fades, you lie back against a pile of rope, full and slightly dizzy from the spices. The stars shimmer over the sea like grains of salt on dark silk. The world is smaller now, but infinitely richer. Every port is a picnic, every recipe a passport. You close your eyes and listen to the tide. The Silk Routes whisper their last secret, that history's sweetest treasures weren't silk or gold, but the humble snacks that taught strangers how to share.
And now, as the night softens around you, the waves slow their rhythm, as if rocking the memory of all those forgotten meals. You breathe in, slow and deep, the scent of salt and spice lingering in your mind. The silk routes stretch behind you, not as dusty roads anymore, but as threads of flavor weaving the world together. You picture the desert fires burning low, the soft crunch of almonds echoing across the dunes. You remember the laughter of merchants, the sizzle of oil in a pan, the shimmer of sugar melting under the sun. These sounds fade now, one by one, until only quiet remains. The world, once vast and noisy, narrows to a single comforting truth. We've always sought sweetness in the slowest places. From camel trails to crowded ports, from the brittle bite of sesame candy to the soft crumble of honey bread, each moment of flavor carried us forward, mile by mile, century by century. Let the journey settle inside you like a gentle aftertaste, warm, lingering, and kind. You can almost feel the weight of 1,000 shared meals pressing lightly on your heart, reminding you that even the smallest bite can hold the history of the world. The tide sighs against the shore, the stars blur. Somewhere far off, a merchant hums a half-forgotten tune about almonds and home. You let the sound drift away, your body sinking into the quiet rhythm of sleep. The silk routes fade into darkness, leaving only sweetness behind.